everyone. Mr. James O'Neill here, speaker and owner of Mastery for All. Mastery for All partners with school districts to bring mastery of mathematics through professional development, through coaching, and through consulting. I want to see everybody master mathematics, specifically our Black boys who have historically not mastered it in this space. And so one day I was literally on LinkedIn and there was this article titled, "Is Math a Racist Subject?" And I read that article and I said, I want to do a podcast on that. And so I'm bringing in my friends, people that I've met in the space, people that actually have reached out to me and say, hey, I want to speak to this subject about equity. And so I did not prompt them in their answers. They are literally speaking from their experiences, from the research as it relates to equitable instruction in mathematics. So I want you to sit tight. I want you to have an open mind, an open heart, an open spirit to listen and to hear these experts speak to this subject. Is math a racist subject? And I'm going to see you on the other side. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Is Math a Racist Subject? I am your host, Mr. James O'Neill, and joining me today is the brilliant Audra McPhillips. Hey, Audra.
Hey, James.
So glad you decided to come on the podcast. I know we've been going back and forth for a while behind the scenes to get you here, but I knew that you needed to be here to lift up your brilliance to the audience today. So I'm glad you joined and I'm excited to get started in the conversation. And so, like always, before I get started, I always tell people about the brilliant people that I bring onto the podcast. I don't just want y'all to think I'm just randomly grabbing people off the street and be like, you want to be on a podcast? I got a podcast to talk about math. No, these are legit people that do the work and know the work. And so Audra McPhillips is the pre-K through 12 mathematics instructional specialist and coach for the West Warwick Public School District in Rhode Island. She is a national thinking mathematics trainer for the American Federation of Teachers Educational Research and Dissemination Program, as well as the vice president of the West Warwick Teachers Alliance. Audra proudly served on the board of directors of Ed Report from 2015 through 2022, which was very recent. She is an adjunct professor in the School of Education at Johnson & Wales University and is a mathematics facilitator, content writer, and facilitator coach for Unbound Ed. Can we give it up for Miss Audra McPhillips? Yeah. I did not know.
Now I know why I'm tired, James, when you read that bio.
Yeah, here doing the work. Doing the work. I did not know you was an adjunct professor. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So I've learned something new about you, even in our journey together as we continue to get to know one another. So Audra, every time I start the podcast, I start off with the initial question. The opening of the podcast explains where it came from. I was literally reading an article on LinkedIn and someone asked this question and I read this article and I was just like, ooh, I want to dive into this question with my colleagues and friends. And so I wanted to just get your thoughts. We haven't talked about this previously, so everything you're about to share with me is what everyone is going to receive. Is going to be brand new to me as well. So your thoughts on the question, is math a racist subject?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. When I first got your invitation for this podcast and I saw that question, I also was like, that's not a question I've thought about before. When people talk about math, it's like this universal language, right? Math kind of transcends cultural boundaries. And it's like, math is universal. However, thinking about the question that you posed, and the intersection between like math itself and our math education system, I got to thinking about, who in our schools, obviously I think about my district, but I think about all schools, gets access to all of the math. Like who do we gatekeep from certain courses? Who sees themselves in the curriculum that we choose? Who has their ideas and their identity affirmed in our math classrooms? And when I start to think of it that way, I mean, there's a lot of systemic racism structures that exist in math education that impact certain groups of students in a not good way. Like that's just reality.
Right.
Reality. And I think, we know that math is a gatekeeper as well into like college pathways and economic mobility and things like that. And so, who we allow to have all the math and have access to the math definitely impacts certain groups of students, particularly, Black and brown boys. And so, so I don't know if math itself is racist, but the education system and the way that we allow math to be accessed and consumed by different groups of students, I think, is huge. And then interestingly enough, was just rereading, I think I'd read it before, but Tima Okun has written about the white supremacy, characteristics of white supremacy culture. It actually just came up in a meeting I was in the other day, but I also reading it previously. And just, the ideas of like perfectionism and quantity over quality and only one right way, like so many of those characteristics, when you think about a math class, are, staples in the math class that I went to when I was a kid. And I think, we know that those are part of the structures that don't serve all students. Right. And I think we also know the antidote to those things. Like, it's not about being right. What do we value in the math class? Do we value being perfect and getting all the answers correct? Or do we value the process? Do we value getting, lots of problems done? Or do we value, just the thinking and the approaches and the varied approaches in our spaces? So, so I guess if I had to answer the question, I think the way that many of us are teaching math and offering math to students definitely still has a lot of components of racism embedded in it. They're systemic, they're cultural, and it's a lot of work to change those things.
Yeah, I appreciate you. And usually I just let people just talk it out in this first question because you all, this is episode 11, which I neglected to say in the beginning. But in this episode, I have learned that there's so much that is unpacked in the very beginning of just answering the question, that it just helps build out everything else. Because you said some things, everybody says something, and I'm so blessed to do this and to talk to you all and everything. Because everyone says something different. We're saying the same thing, but there's a different pathway that we're taking. That's why we're all needed with the work that we do. And so you talked about access and not saying that math is racist inherently. We talk about math being a language and it transcends all cultures and different things like that you lifted up. But you talked about who we give access to. And then you got into like the white supremacy culture. And I've heard it, and I was on a LinkedIn DEI session where somebody lifted it up, but because where I got my math cap on and my education cap on. And you said something like quality over quantity. And it triggered me because I remember growing up in the classroom and doing a whole bunch of problems. When I became a teacher, it was just like, we got to give you a whole bunch of problems. And when math went online, it was just like, you need to do problem after problem after problem. And things like Delta math, for instance, when I first got started, I was just like, they need to do it 10 problems. And then I was actually in a PD and someone was like, if they can do it once, twice, why are we asking them to do it redundantly over and over again? But I didn't know what that was connected to. And it just got it today, how I had to literally relinquish this idea that I have to punish you in a way to get this in your head. And the more you do it, the more you're going to remember it. But actually, you just become disinterested because you're just like, this is the 5th time I'm doing the same thing over and over again. And so unpacking a little bit more about how the white supremacy culture has married its way into math culture and the way we teach mathematics.
Yeah, so I think while you were talking, I was making a connection to another researcher because, and we just talked about you learning that I'm an adjunct professor. So I have my students at Johnson & Wales read this article by Stigler and Hebert called Teaching is a Cultural Activity. And it's not necessarily an article about math teaching. It's just an article about teaching in general. But it just talks about the fact that culturally, we all were students at one point in time in our lives, right? Those of us who are teachers and those of us who are not teachers, we're all students. And so experiencing that culture of what being a student looked like then impacts in a big way in our brains, like you were saying, the way in which we teach now, even
Right.
if we know better. So
Yes.
even if we've learned there are better ways to serve our students, that culture of teaching and what it looks like is incredibly hard to break into, even with really high quality, like PD, curriculum, all of it, even with the piece around like examining your own biases, like and really digging in. It doesn't matter. You can do all of that work, but it is so hard to resist the pull of the culture of teaching. And because,
Oh, can I interrupt you real quick because
yes,
you just said something like, oh, and I'm gonna get you to really stay here for a little bit because it is the culture in which you learned you, whether it's good or bad. Like some people look at me and the work that I do as and showing up as a black man in a space where I'm trying to lift all by making sure that I lift the brilliance of black boys. I started to realize that it doesn't matter my skin complexion, it's the culture I received. I have to undo the system of the culture. And I remember, and I'm gonna get you right back to what you were talking about because you're talking good, Audra. But I
yeah,
remember sitting in a professional development and someone told me that we have to separate the academic consequences for behavior consequences. Like literally, I used to punish kids when they were talked through on a test, 5 points, 5 points. And I used to take that and it wasn't until I heard that where I was like, I am reinforcing, and who am I punishing all the time? Black boys. The very ones that I'm talking about, I'm here to uplift and make sure. And it was the culture of the classroom because that's the culture I grew up in. You didn't talk during the test, oh, you lost points. But that's a behavior consequence. It shouldn't be mixed with academic. And so I'm punishing someone and bringing their grade down because I'm trying to enforce my expectations on them. So you're talking. Go ahead, Audra, take it over because I can do that forever.
no, that's good. And I think what you just said is important too, because again, going back to that Stigler and Hebert research around teaching being a cultural activity, even if you get to the point that you, like you just said, you're like, what am I doing here? I'm punishing them. I know this isn't right. I'm just doing it because of the culture that I experienced as a student. Their research says that even once you have that realization, you also currently work in a culture where there are other teachers that you collaborate with. Those teachers, even once you realize that and you want to say, I'm not doing this anymore, they're like, but no, we have to do this because. So they also kind of try to reel you back in. And no one's doing this intentionally or to hurt kids, or they're not. It's just they also feel strongly about that culture. And it's one of those things that is just so hard to change. And that culture, back to your second question you asked me, that culture, again, has so much white supremacy characteristics built into it. And again, I will say it again, particularly in math class. And I was so jarred by this myself when reading those, like the three that I said, quantity over quality. Like we value getting a lot done in math. We always have. We value, this idea that there's one right answer and there's one way to get there, right? Like those are things and we value perfectionism. And when you think about that, and how that can really relate to a student's identity as like a math identity, or even just a student identity. No one's ever going to be perfect in math, right? And getting a lot of problems done, like you said, doesn't mean you're a mather. It just doesn't. Like doing two problems elegantly and in a way that shows just this divergent, amazing reasoning and thinking, coming up with a different way that I hadn't thought of. That's what we need to value in our math classes. But realistically, it's not what we value in most of our math classes. And I am privileged to work in a district that I get to support teachers pre-K through 12, and I'm in math classes all the time. And I will tell you, we are doing this work, and I love to see people growing in these areas. But when we reflect together as teachers, they will tell you they're still caught up in those things. It's hard to say, it's hard to tell the kids, I value the process. I value collective learning. I value all these different approaches when deep down inside, you're not sure if that's what you really value. Yeah. It's why we're standing here having this conversation.
Most
it's
definitely.
why this is a hard thing to change.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you say that because it is a journey that you go on as an educator yourself. do I really value? I remember the first time I was really challenged with group work and pairing kids up because the culture was we sat in rows. You didn't talk while we didn't talk like you did. It was the I do, we do, you do. And it was a brilliant, amazing classroom was a quiet classroom where students sat there and they mimicked their teacher and everything like that. And so when I got into teaching and they were just like, yeah, students need to talk more and collaborate more, I was like, I don't value that. That's not what the culture I valued, but because it kept, and one of the things that I love that you're saying, like the journey, you ask yourself, do I really value that? And I always now started asking myself, but why don't I? Because I think we don't get to that place. And it many times that will take the pressure off of you because your why is connected to what was exposed to you. It's not that, like you're saying, it's not like you want to do damage on anyone. Like it wasn't that I wanted to specifically pick on Black boys when it was time to test. That wasn't my goal. My goal was like, I really want an environment where all kids can feel comfortable and they can take the test and not be distracted. That was my goal. But my method in doing that was the harmful part. And so talk to me, because you've been talking about like how you support teachers. How do you specifically in the work that you do support teachers in that journey of, okay, owning what we do?
Yeah. So I think, and I've been doing this job, gosh, I don't know how many years, a lot of years, I guess. I've been coaching teachers for about 15 years. And I think when I started this journey of coaching teachers, I was really focused on two things. Like, you got to know your content really well, and you've got to know those research, like those strategies, those pedagogical moves that you were talking about, like how to get kids to really work in groups well, how to, so I focused a lot on that. And listen, to my credit, in some ways, I support teachers pre-K through 12. And there are a lot of teachers that I support. The bulk of the teachers live in that K-5 range, right? Because there's a lot of them because they teach all the subjects. A lot of the people that went in that direction went there because they don't maybe love math, and they want to be a teacher, but math's a little scary, right? So helping them to develop content knowledge was important initially because it's really hard to value your thinking, James, if I'm not comfortable with the math itself to even know if your thinking jives, right? So I spent a lot of time there. I think I was missing two pieces then. One, that those teachers needed to build up their own math identity in order to really be able to serve other students well. Mm-hmm. But two, what you were talking about earlier, part of this journey is helping teachers examine their mindset, helping them decide, am I making this instructional move with this group of students because of some sort of bias that lives inside of me? Do you know what I mean? Am I marginalized? Recognizing I have marginalized groups of students I personally have marginalized groups of students in my classroom. When I was a 6th grade teacher, I would look at this group of students and say, oh my gosh, these poor kids, they need this help. I need to help them feel good about themselves. I'm going to put this work in front of them because I feel like that's what they need in this moment. And, I was perpetually giving them work that wasn't the work that they deserved. Yeah. It wasn't grade level work, wasn't truly engaging work, because I was trying to do good things for them and not sort of realizing that my brand of help was actually, like you said, doing harm. Mm-hmm. And I had to really think about, who are those students that I'm saying who is this the they that needs help? And the they that needed help in my class were my Black and brown students, my students who came from low income families. And I had to do some work. And this is the work I try to do with teachers, to ask yourself the question, why am I putting these students in this group? What is behind that? Is it something inside of me that is causing me to do that? And that, to me, beyond the pedagogy, beyond the content, like that's the real work. And I think that's the hard work to do with people. And I'll be honest, I wasn't doing that work with people for all 15 years, but I am doing that work with people now. And it's a combination of those things, right? Like, you can do the mindset work, but if you don't know the content and you don't have teaching strategies, you're not getting there. Nope. But you can also know the content really well and have the best strategies in the world. But if you have those things that live inside of you that cause you to make decisions about certain groups of students, you're not getting there either. So it's just a combination of all of those things.
Yeah, I love the combination, and what you're almost setting up for my next question, because you you really hit on it, and I just want you to go expand it even more, because it is the mindset work that is definitely necessary. But if you don't know the content, like, you may believe that all kids deserve and all kids can. If you, I now say that skill plus passion equals impact. Like, you can be passionate and mindful and everything, but you still have to be skillful and implement it, because what's going to happen is that that passion that you feel is going to dissolve, because you're not skillful enough to really manifest what's in your heart concerning kids. It will start to get like, do I really believe that they're still not achieving? They're still not achieving. They're still not achieving. I believe all kids can, but they still haven't achieved. I don't, because we don't know how to do that. So I want to talk to you about how, in your experience, has it been to making sure that all races master mathematics? You kind of started talking about that when you went on your own personal journey, and you talked about, well, who are the they, and how did you turn that? How do you turn that for yourself? How do you turn that for the teachers you support? What's your experience in making sure that all races master mathematics?
Yeah. So I feel like I could take this in two directions.
Go in both. Go in whatever direction you can go in.
Go this way first. We'll go left first. I feel like one thing I feel very fortunate. I'm taking a different direction than what I was just talking about, I guess, but I can go back to that too. So because I am a district level, I work in a really small district. There are only 6 schools that I support. Rhode Island's a different place. We have very small school districts, right? So okay. I support about 300 teachers across 6 schools, small district. And because I'm the only math coach, it's just me. I'm the math person, coach, PD person, whatever. So because of that, I have I'm very fortunate to sit on district level committees often, right? And so we were just talking about doing the individual work in the classrooms with the teachers, which is really important because they are the people who are closest to the students, but they also work in a system, right? Mm-hmm. And that system dictates some of the decisions that they can make, even with their door shut in their rooms. And so I am very fortunate to be able to sit on those district level committees. And I'm very fortunate to feel confident enough to sort of try to disrupt some of the things that are going on in our district. So I am in a position where I can ask the questions like, hey, let's look at the data at the high school, and let's look at our honors classes in math and who's in them and who's not in them, right? And why is that happening? And so I feel like when it comes to impacting these things, I get to do it really close to the classroom level, but I also get to be a voice in those meetings. And it's been great because our district admin has been more interested in having those conversations. And because of the work I do at Unbound Ed, I was even able to organize a research crawl for people at the district level, to think of these kinds of things when we look at our policies and our practices and our structures. And so I feel like that I've been very fortunate to be able to be that voice, or have a voice, I guess, at that level as someone who is really just I'm a teacher coach. Do you know what I mean? I'm not an administrator. I don't get to make those decisions, but I feel like I get to influence them, which has been pretty great. And I think we're having the right conversations because of that. And it makes me feel like in our district, we're a small district, right? And so the way we're structured, I get to have that voice. I wonder in larger districts, if teachers get to have that voice. And I also have the opportunity to, as a white woman doing equity work, I feel like I'm always struggling with, I have a voice because of what I look like, quite honestly. And so I need to use that.
Right.
But also my job is to lift up the voices of the people who really should be talking about this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But again, because I have this role, I can do that, and I can go to our families and our teachers that don't look like me, and talk to them about what they value, what's missing from their perspective, because their perspective is the one that really matters here, not mine. You know what I mean? So I'm always balancing this. I need to use my voice. I also need to lift up these voices. what's the right balance? I'm sure I haven't struck it. I just know that me being aware of it,
Mm-hmm.
it is really, really important in this work, like really important.
And the work you're doing at the level that you're doing is definitely having an impact. So I just want to let you know that personally, and don't diminish what you are doing, because it is definitely impacting. Because what you are saying is that your impact for all is bringing awareness to the disparities that sometimes, Audra, that we just get used to. Like if I lived in Seattle and it rained all the time, what am I going to expect? I'm going to expect rain. It takes disruption to a climate, to an atmosphere, to a culture, if you will, to actually believe something different. Or it may take exposure of possibilities of going somewhere else, doing something else. And so when I personally, as a human being, look at like we are people of tradition. We're people of routines. We don't like change. It takes a while for us to change. It takes someone to be like, hey, flag on the play, flag on the play. We have all these other people that it looks like on paper, they don't have access to this class. They don't have access to this level. And so, again, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for bringing awareness, because that's the first start. And so, as you talked about that, I started thinking about our Black boys. And, my passion in the business that I started is really supporting all by lifting up the brilliance of the most vulnerable demographic and education here in America. And so I want to know your thoughts concerning historically why you believe Black boys have not achieved proficiency in mathematics, or why we as Black boys have not been deemed as one worthy of access to these level classes. What are your thoughts around that?
So my thoughts on that kind of relate back to the last question we were talking about. And it's the fact that historically, for many years, and not just historically, like if I look around my district right now, today, most of the people who are teaching look exactly like me. They're white women. And in the community that I'm in, and probably not every community, but certainly where I am, the community that I serve, most of the teachers look like me. And we're talking specifically about Black boys, right? And so, this idea that I was talking about earlier, where it's easy for me to other people that don't look like me, that don't share the same cultural background as me, don't, present the same way I do. In some ways, it's easy for me to other. And I know even myself, and we were just talking about this, when I was a sixth grade teacher, the students that I was, there was a provision gap there between what I was providing to those students and what they actually deserved. I was perpetuating the gap that existed between what those Black boys knew and understood about math and what they deserved to know. And it wasn't because they couldn't do it. It was because I wasn't even giving them access to it. Right. I would have a day once a week where I would put the kids in 3 different groups, and it would be a day where you would get what you need. And those students were all grouped together, getting work that I thought they needed, I guess because I didn't know any better. And so I think a big piece of it is that we've othered Black boys for a lot of years, that I do believe it came from a good place, because we didn't understand that our brand of helping was actually really hurting, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I know for me, the work that I needed to do was surround myself with like brilliant Black people like you and others, seriously. And also to work on my own biases, my own disconscious racism that lived inside of me, but also like getting to know my students in a real way. Like not just James works at the restaurant down the street and, Jessica, she's on the cheerleading squad. Not that, but like really getting to know who you are, what makes you tick. What would motivate you in my math classroom? Because it's probably different than what I think would motivate you in my math classroom.
I love that, Audra.
And it's my job. It's not your job. Like, it's my job to figure that out. What is your family value? Like, and that's, again, we've been talking about this. It's all hard. That's really hard work to do. If I don't do that, I never get to serve you in the way that you deserve, like ever. I have to go figure that out about you. I have to. And so, and I think that's historically why we're where we're at. I think Black boys have been othered. And I think the work that we need to do to get to know the students that are different from us so we can really figure out what makes them tick is still hard to do and still not happening the way it should. And I think it's why we're still in this place.
I thank you for lifting up your thoughts and your personal stories surrounding that. And I think your transparency is so needed. Sometimes people can look at they can look at me and forget that we're all of us are on a journey. We may advocate for this work, but even in this advocation, like there are times I show up to something and I'm just like, whoa, I ain't considered that. Like, like it hits differently, and still got work to do, or someone will point out something that I may have said that may have rubbed them wrong or anything like that. I was literally leading a professional development, and I did your actual. Was I doing your card sort? No. I was doing a grouping activity. And I asked people, the first person to go are people that have the person that has the most kids. And if you don't have any kids, you don't necessarily qualify to go first. And a participant came back to me and said that was triggering for her because with women sitting in a room and they don't have kids, like you start thinking, well, why? Why don't you have any kids? Is there something wrong? Or why aren't you married? And she brought that to my attention. And I was like, whoa, like it wasn't me back in my younger days being like, oh my God, we're just so sensitive. That's something I would have did back then because it's just like, it's not even what I meant. But it was the fact that, first of all, I'm proud and glad and happy that you are brave enough to approach the facilitator about this, but understanding how that perception, when you said that, in education, not just in your district, but in education as a whole, over 70% of the people that are in education are white women. And, that was designed from the beginning as we look at education and who were the teachers and why they were the teachers, And so when she said that, I was just like, yeah, I won't use that example again. It won't be a qualifier of who gets to talk again if you have kids. And so, like, when I heard you talk about that and you talked about getting to know your kids, doing the work for you and asking what will motivate you. Like, I thought when you said that for a child, a Black boy, like, I don't have the answer. Like, I'm okay with not knowing everything that I need to know because in the white supremacy culture, I have the power. And whatever I say goes. Like, I don't come down to your level. You come up to my level, right? That's always been the case. And so I appreciate your transparency about that. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because, we're all about this math life. And people always think, I'm a little biased when it comes to math and everything because I've been here in this space and I know the power and I love the content. But I just want to ask you, why is mathematic mastery so important? We do this work. We love this work. Why is it so important?
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, I don't think any of us has ever been a teacher and not had this question asked of us by students, right? Or even parents, like, why is this class so important? Why am I in this class? Like, how is this going to help me? And I do think that those of us who do this work, we get super excited about, I don't know, you name it, linear equations, number multiplication. I don't know what it is. Like, we're jazzed about that, right? But that's not the answer to this question because it's very rare that I'm like walking down the street and somebody like runs up to me with a linear equation. They want me to graph it or something. So it doesn't happen. But, and we talked about this a little bit before. I mean, listen, math is we know, again, I always want to go in two different directions. We know that there are parts of math that transcend K-12, K-16, whatever, that transcend all the schooling, right? Like, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not solving problems in my life. And there's not a day that goes by that just being able to like analyze that situation, figure out what information is extraneous, figure out what information I don't have. I never have unlike my math book, I never have all the information I need to actually solve the problem I have. Like being able to create a solution plan, like those things happen every single day. And that's enduring, right? Like you leave the math class and I hope every student I've ever interacted with in a math class has left with the ability to do those things in day-to-day life. So there's that. There's like a very broad problem solving. But, like having just general number sense, again, like your financial life decisions depend on you being able to have some understanding of number and math and estimation and like what makes sense. And, just looking at a newspaper article and trying to be involved civically in your life, there's data that I have to like look at in current events and politics. Like we need people to be able to interact civically right now in a reasonable and appropriate way and have their voices valued. But if you don't understand that data you're looking at, you're gonna have a hard time being a valued voice in those conversations. And so, like, all of those things matter. And what we talked about before, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, economic mobility in this world, access to like higher paying jobs, college pathways, math is a big indicator of that. And so I want my students to be able to have all of those choices, right? So I've got to make sure they have mastery to get there.
Yeah. I'm finalizing your final thoughts because I want to come back to it. Math is a great indicator of stability in life, access to jobs, careers. It's a indicator the way it has been positioned in our society and just in general. And when I hear that, I hear, well, wouldn't be a surprise why some people have access and why some people don't have access. Why it wouldn't be a surprise why the haves continue to haves and the have-nots continue to have not. And so I love how you lifted that, the importance of that, but also analyzing our world, right? Analyzing our life, analyzing, and that's why when you go back to your original statement about do we value the process over that process of going through and analyzing a problem is a life skill. Because in life, you will have problems that you will have to solve, right? And I love that. And one of the things that you said that I want you to talk more about is being a valued voice, like being able to take data, analyze it, especially with so much that's going on in our society, so many things and messages that are coming our way, but understanding, going through the process. Math helps you go through the process of analyzing and making connections. Unpack that a little bit. How? Because maybe somebody's just like, well, that's not the math I had. I will just solve problems. We didn't analyze. But tell us, how does math help with that? You can even use math examples if you want to. But tell us, how does math help us analyze and make connections?
Yeah. So I think part of what you're hitting on is part of the problem with what we've been talking about. If math didn't look like that for you, right? Like if it wasn't about you being able to examine some data, think about what it means, think about how it can impact your learning community, the community you live in, then somewhere along the way, somebody didn't give you access to the math, right? Like you had access to a certain brand of math that we all know is going to get you, and maybe that was intentional, like you said, in our system, that was going to get you only to a certain point. But just think about the whole COVID business, right? So COVID came out of nowhere. You couldn't turn on the news, Google search any information, pick up a newspaper, and not have to analyze a bunch of data about there were graphs, there were charts, there was all kinds of information. And if you wanted to make an informed decision for your family, for yourself, whatever that might be, you were at a great disadvantage in being able to make those decisions if you couldn't make sense of the data that was presented to you. I also am thinking now about the school board here where I live, and the people in town who are involved in maybe conversations around the schools. And, data comes out a lot around schools, test score data,
right.
Budgets, you name it. And, collectively in our community, the people who can understand that data and sometimes manipulate it in a way that serves them can sometimes influence the direction that our schools go in, that our town goes in. And so again, if all of the students that I serve don't leave that K-12 environment really being able to look at that information,
Mm-hmm.
make sense of it, be able to speak confidently about it, they're not going to be able to impact the changes in their communities that maybe need to happen because they just
Yeah.
don't have the skills to do that. And again, why the question for me is always, why don't they have the skills to do that? Why are some students having access to that kind of math and some students not? And I think that's what we're talking about here, getting everyone to that place where they can do that work, getting everyone into those classes
Yeah.
where that work actually happens, right? And again, that doesn't always happen, and we know that.
Yeah. And that is super important. And I was doing a message, a keynote actually, in Newark about 3 weeks ago, and I told them about the time that I first was in my class in NC State. I'm with the Wolfpack, yeah. And I had Dr. Stiff ask me, why does A squared plus B squared equal C squared? And it was the very first time someone had asked me why. And I remember sitting there like with all 20 of us that were math majors in math. And some of us was going to teach high school math. And I was in the middle school math track and nobody could tell them. And you know the reason why no one can tell them? Because no one gave us access to it. And it wasn't like it's a hard proof. It makes perfect sense. It's the fact that somebody made a decision about me based upon culture, based upon whatever, that I wouldn't say I don't have the right, but I can't create a space for sense making, for discovery, for conversation, for connection, because that's probably not where they came from as well. And so we've been talking about things that we would change about mathematics. Is there, outside of anything else that we've talked about, are there any other things that in mathematics teaching, in the way it's presented, that you feel like we can do a better job of that?
And we talked about a lot of things. We've talked about, again, I feel like we do a pretty good job. As someone, you're talking about math. You're talking about math education in general. I was starting to take this question in the direction of, because I teach math educators to be math educators.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, I think it comes back to mindset and knowing your students. I don't know that there's any other, at least that I know of. I don't know that there's any other answer, but I do think we have to improve both of those things in education. Examining your own mindset, figuring out how to better know your students. I do think, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Adrian Mims. He created the Calculus Project. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I've heard of the Calculus Project. Yes.
And it happened in Boston, I want to say 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
And it's a Boston initiative. And I had this great opportunity to speak with Dr. Adrian Mims a couple of times through, I do this work for this group called IACT for the American Federation of Teachers. IACT stands for Identity Affirming Classroom Team. So we're a group of educators from across the country, and we've been studying not just math, but identity in general and how to create classroom spaces where students can show up as their full selves, right? And also have all of their brilliance lifted up and affirmed. It's a great project. We've gotten to work with a lot of experts, and Dr. Adrian Mims came to our group a few times. And he recognized in Boston public schools that obviously, like we already talked about, there was an underrepresentation in higher level math, right? Students who were going into STEM fields and STEM careers from those, from the high school. There's an underrepresentation of obviously Black, brown students of color, you name it. And so he started this project. And, obviously part of that project was really working with teachers on mindset, but he also did some of the work that I was just talking about, where he went out into the community. He's a Black man himself, but he went into the community and talked to Black families about, like, what do you know about the pathway that students can take in this school system to get to higher math? Do you know what I mean? Like, how is that communicated to you and your family? Is it communicated in a way that, makes sense to you, or that you?
And the
answers were all no, right? They were all no. And so he built this program based on, a community of people we've been underserving for a long time, having a voice. And, he put and some people have really pushed back on this, but he created math classes for students, honors classes for students, where the entire class was Black boys, girls under low income. He put those students together because they said they would feel more comfortable taking chances, taking risks in sort of that affinity group. They weren't always together, but he created opportunities during the day for them to be together and dig into the math with one another. Again, he created all of these different mechanisms for inviting families in and communicating in ways that they valued. And he just did amazing transformational, like, talk about disruptive work. And he has done it in Boston. I mean, his work has been applied in other places and other people can get involved with him. But I think his work is at least a model for how we can make those changes, because he's putting in action a lot of the things that we've been talking about in like a very real way. Like, I aspire to get there in our district. I was grateful to be able to talk to him and be thinking about the ways in which those kinds of changes could be made. But I think that's just a great example of some of the things we could and should be doing.
Yeah, I love that, Audra. I really do. And one of the things that the relationship piece, I mean, I don't want teachers when they hear the podcast or they hear me speak or anything like that. I'm always coming from a heart that this is beautiful work. It is hard work. And I know you got into this work for the right reasons. Like what you signed up for, you 99% of us love kids, and something impacted us that we wanted to be a lift for kids. The small percentage of us signed up because we didn't have nothing else to do. Like that's not the case. We encounter teachers all the time. It's hard work. It is heart work as well. And it is a work within a system that many times you're exhausted from, okay, what else do I have to do? 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 And it can feel like that sometimes. But what I love is that at the core of our why should be, how do I build relationship? Like at the end of the day, if there is something that we can, like you said, capitalize on, if there is the change, it is, what do I need to do to build relationship? And as you gave an example, I remember I was a smart little Black boy, but when I tell you I knew nothing about honors classes, I knew nothing about AP courses. Audra, nothing. And I stumbled upon them because I qualified for Algebra 1 in 8th grade. The very teacher I talk about all the time in my spoken word, Mrs. Simmons, who changed my life, gave me access, gave me a placement test. I got into Algebra 1. And when I got into high school, they were like, oh, we're going to sign you up for honors classes. Audra, I don't know why. I don't know. I do know why, because nobody in my family took them, right? I didn't know you get a half point for honors classes and it was weighted GP. When I tell you, I had no access to that. Mm-hmm. And so when I was exposed to it, I was just like, oh, this is why your GPAs are so high. They're over 4. I learned so much. And so, but again, someone getting out into the community. So when I started my club for Black boys, I told families that I wanted to make sure, do you know that our school gives students access to 2 levels of accelerated math in 8th grade? So by the time they get into high school, they are literally at a junior level math class. Do you know that your child has access to that, how to support your child through that? And what I realized is that when I first came to the school, and I'm shut up because I'm talking for a very long time, but when I first came to my school, there were 0 Black boys in the highest level of accelerated math class. We had 2 levels. We had Math 1, full semester, all year long, I would say. And then we had Math 1, accelerated math, and Math 2 that you can take by semesters. There were no Black boys in that class. And so I literally wanted to bring awareness because I know y'all can and you should have access to. So to bring my little rant and get off my little soapbox for a moment, Audra, I don't know if you have anything else to add, but I wanted to ask you this final question. I'll take that as a no. So here's my final question.
Sorry, yes, I was waiting for the final question.
I was like, nope, she's good. I love saving this for last because it just grounds me in the work that we do. So what is your personal mission to the advancement of mathematics education? And you can speak to your why that's your mission, but What is it? Why it is? Just land on that.
Yeah. So this one is pretty easy to answer. Just because my mission is that every single student that walks into a math class in my district, or heck, any student that walks into a math class, period, anywhere, really is able to show up as their full self, be affirmed, be valued, and have their math identity like grown and nurtured. And that comes from, honestly, I just want everyone to have the same experiences that I had. So I showed up as a white middle class, blonde haired, blue eyed, compliant little girl that sat in class. And that was what teachers wanted at that time. We talked about that cultural thing, right? And so from the very beginning of my life, people in power, teachers, they listened to what I said. They valued my ideas. They told me I was smart. Unlike what you said, they told me I was gifted. You know, they gave me access to all the things. This special math club, you belong in that. This class, you go into that. And they believed that about me. So I believed it, you know, which is why I'm where I am today. I believed that about myself because those people believed that about me. And so that is just what I want every student to walk into. I want every student to have that experience where people believe in them so much that they believe in themselves. And that is 100% why I do this work and why I'll continue to do this work. So every child gets that experience that I was so fortunate to have.
Audra, you're gonna make me cry. You're gonna make me cry because it's that is so beautiful. Yeah.
That's what I want.
That's what I want too. I want the same thing you want. The same.
You know what? I don't want to water it down, but I don't know that I just listen. Do I think that I had some brilliance inside of me? Sure. I believe that all students have brilliance inside of them. I just think that sometimes I didn't get those opportunities because I was brilliant. Do you know what I mean? But because I got those opportunities, I believed that. And that's like a really important thing that we just have to give that to all the kids every day, all the kids, all the time.
Yeah. I love it. Audra, like I said in our pre-call, I knew you would not disappoint. And you have not disappointed today. I always gain so much respect from colleagues and friends in this space because sometimes we don't get to have these one-on-one conversations. We here and there, we're all carry on in life. But when I get to sit down and hear your heart, it's a blessing. So to wrap things up, is math a racist subject?
I said math itself, no. The way that we have been approaching things, definitely we have some work to do.
Got you. Everyone, this is episode 11 of Is Math a Racist Subject? Audra McPhillips, I appreciate your wonderful heart. This has been an amazing episode. And so hopefully whoever's listening, that you'll do what you got to do to share this out and to reflect on the brilliance and rewinding and watching it all over again. This is James O'Neill, Mr. James O'Neill, with another podcast. We are saying to everyone, have a good day.
Thanks, James.
Listen, I hope you got everything you needed from this episode. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, do what you got to do to get this message out. As we talk about getting the message out, I would love to extend the offer to work with you and your teachers, whether it be a speaker, whether it be professional development, consulting, or even coaching. I am about that mastery for all life. So I want to extend that offer to you. My information is on the screen. But above all else, I'm super excited that you had space enough to welcome me into wherever you're listening to me at, all right? So I'm super excited that you decided to join me today. Have an amazing day.